George Walker W. P. Bush, July 6, 1946, the 43rd President of the United States from January 20, 2001 to January 20, 2009. He was governor of the state of Texas prior to his assumption of the presidency from 1995 to 2000. He was elected president after the results of the elections closer to the Democratic rival Al Gore. In 2004 he was re-elected for a four-year term after defeating. Entering politics, he was a businessman, and his business included several oil companies. He was also one of the owners of the Texas Ranger Baseball Club from 1989 to 1998. He owns a ranch in Crawford, Texas. And a number of his family members are prominent politicians. He is the son of former President George Herbert Walker Bush, the older brother of former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and the grandson of United States. His reign, the period during which George W. Bush became President of the United States of America, is considered a critical period as New York was subjected to an air attack attributed to Al-Qaeda on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, in which nearly 3,000 civilians were killed, after which the War on Terrorism was declared in Afghanistan in 2001 and then the Iraq War in 2003. Economically, he was behind strict measures, by restructuring the banks, while injecting a large financial value into the markets in order to preserve and prevent their downfall as a result of an economic crisis that is considered the largest since 1929, which caused a number of countries to stagnate and unemployment reached its highest level in 5 years. After the end of his presidency, he returned to Texas with his family, bought a house in Dallas, and had a book called Decision Points. President Bush received a very warm welcome during his visit to Georgia, given that the government during his reign facilitated the transition from the dependency that Georgia had on Moscow. His private life. George Walker Bush was born in New Haven, Connecticut on July 7, 1946. He was the firstborn to George Bush Sr. and Barbara Bush and was raised in Midland, Texas and Houston, Texas. He has two brothers and two sisters. His younger sister died at the age of 3. President Bush is of English, German, Irish, French and Scottish ancestry. George Walker Bush attended state public schools in Midland, Texas, and after the family moved to Houston he was enrolled in the city's schools. He enrolled at Yale University in Midland, Texas between 1964 and 1968 where he graduated with a history degree. Then he attended Harvard University and graduated with an MBA. He is the only U.S. president with a business administration degree. Texas National Guard Aviation. In May 1968, George Walker Bush joined the Texas National Guard Aviation after 2 years of training and became an official pilot and joined the Houston Airmen team of the Ministry of Defense. In 1972, he stopped working there, and thus his military service ended on November 21, 1971. George Bush was affected in his political life by many influences that led him to adopt certain political stances, foremost among which are the stances he went through in his life and related primarily to the influence of his father's relationship and his hatred for him. In addition to that, his failure to run the family's oil companies, the death of his younger sister, who was affected by her, in addition to the addiction to alcohol and the influence of religion on his orientations, as well as the enmity that brought him together with some personalities, which was a motive for declaring the war on terrorism on the one hand and the invasion of Iraq on the other, and his relations personal with Saddam Hussein, and for Al-Qaeda, it formed the personality of the media man in the information directed to the United States of America about the weaknesses and strengths of the Taliban. His marriage and family life. During a party at his friend's house in 1977, he was introduced to Laura Bush by his friends, who was then a school teacher and also worked in the school library. 3 months later, on November 5, he married her. 5. In 1981 the couple had 2 daughters, Barbara Pierce Bush and Jenna Bush. Both Barbara and Gina graduated from the university in 2004. George Walker Bush says that his wife positively affected him and changed his life when she helped him give up alcohol in 1986. He states that he read more than 190 books during his 8-year presidency. Another of his hobbies is golf. The beginnings of his working life. In 1978, George Walker Bush nominated himself for the position of the U.S. House of Representatives and lost that election by 6%, which made him go to the oil industry and then founded a small company called Arpsto Energy, and his company succeeded and became one of the major oil companies, which made him change the name of the company to Bush Research, and merged his company with other companies to form Spectrum 7, and took the position of its president after that. Bush moved to Washington, D.C., and moved his wife and 2 daughters to live with him. This was to help his father during his presidential campaign. After his father's successful campaign and his father's election to the presidency, he returned to Texas, bought shares in the Texas Rangers, and became the team's general manager for 5 years. People loved him because he chose to sit with them on the team's stadium bench. 5 years later, he sold his name to the team and earned $15 million. Texas Governor George Walker Bush announced a campaign for the governorship of Texas in 1994. His campaign focused on education, security, and other issues important to voters at the time. In this election, he faced Ann Richards of the Democratic Party, who was the governor of Texas and was running for re-election for office. But he eventually won the election and became the governor of Texas after winning 53.5% of the vote. George Walker Bush used the state's $2 billion budget surplus to improve education in state schools and reduce crime and domestic violence. He was known for his good education in the state, as he made students get higher grades compared to other states. George Walker Bush helped Texas become the #1 state in wind power production. In 1998, he was elected to a new term with 69% of the vote, thus becoming the first governor of Texas to be re-elected. He knows that his popularity rose a lot among the people in the state, especially when he declared June 10, 2000, the Day of Jesus Christ in Texas, and asked the residents to do a good deed and help the poor on that day, due to the fact that the state's residents are conservative and religious. During his term of office, the spotlight was on him to run for the position of President of the United States, and that was the reason for his nomination in 2000. His presidency countries visited by George Bush during his presidency. Although Bush originally outlined and set an ambitious agenda for action during his presidency, his priorities were changed significantly in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. Wars broke out in Afghanistan and Iraq, and internal discussions began about immigration, health care, social security, economic policy, and engagement with detainees accused of terrorism. The United States entered an economic recession. War on Terror. President Bush awards British Prime Minister Tony Blair the Presidential Medal of Freedom. After 9/11, Bush declared a global war on terror. Bush ordered the war in Afghanistan 2001 to overthrow the Taliban and al-Qaeda. In his 2002 State of the Union address, Bush asserted that the axis of evil, that included North Korea, Iran, and Iraq, was threatening world peace and posing a great and growing danger. Both the Bush administration asserted its right and determination to wage preventive war. The opposition continued its criticism of Bush's leadership in the war on terror and increased its criticism of the war on Iraq. War on Terror. President Bush awards British Prime Minister Tony Blair the Presidential Medal of Freedom. After 9/11, Bush declared a global war on terror. Bush ordered the war in Afghanistan 2001 to overthrow the Taliban and al-Qaeda. In his 2002 State of the Union address, Bush asserted that the axis of evil, that included North Korea, Iran, and Iraq, was threatening world peace and posing a great and growing danger. Both the Bush administration asserted its right and determination to wage preventive war. The opposition continued its criticism of Bush's leadership in the war on terror and increased its criticism of the war on Iraq. After the presidency. After the inauguration of Barack Obama, Bush and his family moved to Texas, where there was a celebration to welcome them in Midland, Texas, and then he went with his family to live in Dallas, Texas. American football. And then when he announced his new memoir and book, he visited many countries.